Go ahead.
Shane and Katie, there are a lot of people who, when they think about a church, they have a construct in their head about how it's put together and the hierarchy of it, or denominations or whatever. Circle of Hope was something different in Philadelphia, and you were part of that community or that collective. Can you say a little bit about what Circle of Hope is, really, for people who don't have a concept, and the thing that Eliza found attractive about it, or more interesting than your typical church?
Shane will probably have to. I'm like your worst possible member. I was on the periphery. But what's interesting is in your book, you talk about the cells, and those are what really flourish. And that's why I went, because I loved these cell groups, which were small little groups that met outside of the regular Sunday worship meeting. And that's how I originally got involved and fell in love with Circle. And that's what I miss till this day, is being in a cell.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this small group, intimate stuff. But then I often got in trouble is not the right word, but my commitment to the church got questioned because I didn't go to worship on Sunday. But I hosted a cell. Like, I religiously hosted a cell at my own house. I loved it. And so
Katie, your reluctance about Circle from the beginning was really helpful to me. Like, you were skeptical of some of what was happening there in a very respectful way and with a little bit of humor, which I loved. But you were like, well, let's see what you go and make there, and I thought that was really helpful because it allowed me to see some of the contradictions that were so present. To name them as such with some humor and grace. And if you cannot be called out with humor and grace in a religious place, you're in trouble.
Shane, how about you? How did you think about Circle?
Well, some of this is it's so interesting because we're going back like decades, right? So when we started the Simple Way 25 years ago on the north side of Philadelphia, Circle of Hope was just getting started. And so it was kind of an awkward relationship where there's sort of these parallel tracks, like on a railroad, where Circle of Hope's doing church, in a non-traditional traditional sense. I mean, they're having Sunday worship sessions. We were not hosting worship services. We were trying to live in community, bring the gospel to life in our neighborhood every day, do hospitality to folks on the street, but we wanted a community to worship with. And so Circle began to overlap. And the reason Katie uses the language of cells is the idea is it's like cells of a body. They multiply, they die, the body continues to live. And these are like home groups that met in the homes during the week. And then we would do what we called PMs, it's kind of a dual meaning, public meeting for PM, but it also met in the evening. So that was when we gathered for worship. So, I mean, we like that. When I started going to Circle, it had a real punk rock edge. I remember my buddy Anthony had a cordless electric guitar and would run around the entire room like with a mohawk, and it was crazy. And we're listening to Rage Against the Machine. We're like doing like direct action in the streets, but we also took our faith really seriously. And so Circle of Hope was one of those places where you didn't have to worry about hearing something regularly that would offend you because of the exclusion and the kind of old school evangelicalism.
Eliza goes into the punk rock history. He would.
I know.
He hasn't read your book.
Oh,
she knows it. I've been waiting on the hard copy, and I haven't read it because she stole it from me.
I did steal it. I love it.
Eliza,
the other thing that's and Eliza does such a good job with this is that there's been there's just been a massive impact of Circle of Hope, even from people that were on the fringes. Like, a lot of folks love the music of Psalters. Well, Psalters was sort of incubated within Circle, and there's all kinds of other communities that were born that no longer affiliated with Circle. So anyway, that's just kind of how we overlapped.
Yeah. And what you're tapping into, Shane and Eliza, you were willing to take a look at this, is that across the landscape of religion, especially the evangelical part of religion, there were a lot of variations and expressions in the last 25 years. There were lots of movements. I was part of one of those in Minneapolis called Solomon's Porch, Simple Way, Circle of Hope. These things were all over, trying to do something that we found meaningful and thought could be helpful to religion and helpful to culture. Um, I'm super interested in a conversation with the three of us about if we think that actually worked or not. Like, did our dreams actually come to any manifestation of a future? But Eliza, when you started looking at Circle of Hope, it was in a different situation than what you ultimately write about in the book, because you ultimately write about how it ended, how the
Mhm.
events of 2020 and the cross section of COVID and the murder of George Floyd and the reckoning of race and social engagement and politics ultimately had a great impact on that community and maybe precipitated its end. But when it started, your project started, Circle of Hope was alive and well. I remember talking with you
Right.
and you were like, hey, do you know this church in Philadelphia? And I think this is something worth studying. So what people get when they read your book is this microcosm of what happens in religion in America, but the end of it was not what you saw when you started. So can you talk a little bit about why you found it interesting to look at a church before you knew what was ultimately going to come, which creates this great drama and is written like the four gospels, you know, in the names of four characters in the book, a genius structural way.
Mhm.
But what were you looking at and what was attractive to you about it before all the events that came about that would ultimately be part of its ending?
I mean, what was attractive to me about it were two different things. One was that it flew in the face of what conservative evangelicals claim to be quote unquote Bible believing, right? And I couldn't understand as an outsider to evangelicalism how it was that this tradition that was about literally living the teachings of the Bible and where was loving your neighbor? Where was loving your enemy? Where was the Sermon on the Mount? Where were all these teachings that I had grown up with as integral to Christianity? What did it mean to be Bible believing if you weren't living as best you could as Jesus did? You know, Shane and Katie and many others were doing that. They were walking the talk as best they could, you know, and owning the human flaws and humor. Like, how much can you do? You know, a very human endeavor. And that was incredibly inspiring. It was admirable to me, but it was also very inspiring. And I thought that by writing about it, I would help point it out to kids who didn't know, like maybe they were going to a yoga mat and feeling empty. They'd left their mega church. They didn't know where to go. They didn't know that there were these options. And learning about dumpster diving, dinner parties, and intentional communities and common purses and all of these other ways of being alive. You know, one, I think it was Bethany who said to me, you know, people weren't showering, right? This anarcho primitivism,
Right.
casting
Right.
off the bonds of empire, right? And she would be like, "You could smell our church on
Yeah.
Sunday before you
Yeah.
even get in there." And just like again, like the humor and zaniness, you know, all of this. I wanted to write about this because I thought it would be helpful to other young people who were seeking, actually.
Right on.
Hmm.
So you have this vision. There's this community doing something different. It's sort of old school, you know, Anglican church where they had to run the incense before the bishop would show up because people smelled so strongly. I don't know, a lot of people don't know why incense were in church worship. Some of it was to cover up the smell of the congregants. So it's old school, but it's also fresh. It's in the city, but it also feels like it's trying to live a different story. You have this hope of telling this possible future that other people could find hopeful. And
Yeah.
then all these things happen. How do
And then,
you
don't, sorry, Doug, go ahead.
Oh, no, 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 no. You kidding? All you.
No, and then the S hits the fan. You
Right.
know? So, then what happens is real there were already stirrings, and Shane and Katie know this and had we'd already talked about this, but of like, well, okay, we've helped in community like charges of like, well, this is white saviorism. Like, are you willing to look at yourself really? Or are you just out there, you know, to like help others and not really change? And as those questions, so there's like a generational divide between an older group who was like, we've been doing this for a really long time, and we don't need to look within. In fact, here in a time of crisis, like after George Floyd is murdered, shouldn't we be in the streets more than ever? And instead, we're going to hire a DEI consultant, a corporate consultant, to come talk to us about our identity. Like, we're so beyond that. And then there was a younger generation that said, your reluctance to ask those questions is in itself a sign of the problem. And then
Right.
when like these early DEI sessions began to happen. So one big point of contention, the first point of contention I saw that was fascinating was right when lockdown happened, and it was between two of the pastors. And one of the pastors wanted to go online and was, Johnny was way up in the news. He wanted to follow public health strictures. And then Ben White, the son of the founder, push back against that because not because he didn't, think that COVID was serious, but because the government, because Anabaptists don't follow government strictures, because governors were saying you can go to Home Depot. And his argument was, how can you go to Home Depot and not to church? Like, what is an essential business? And then Johnny argued back saying, look, to love your neighbor at this time is to stay home, right? Like, I need to protect my neighbor from myself by not being in physical presence. And that was just super interesting to watch that theology and like right praxis, like watch how did these guys live out their theology in different ways. And that was just the beginning, because what happened, as I alluded to, with the crisis brought about after the murder of George Floyd, is that ultimately the church faced such a reckoning that people needed to go their different ways, that they couldn't square it, that when the older members who had been raised in a culture to see that race wasn't, like, race is a construct, when they got on those DEI meetings and started to say, well, I'm not white, I'm so-called white, right? Because that had been the teaching, that had been the PBS teaching that they'd followed in the early days of Damascus Road. Like, they had done their good anti-racism training. But what got missed there is that, and I don't know how really, they understand ideologically that faith evolves, but then there was a lack of grace with one another over allowing one another to evolve, and forgetting where they themselves had come from just a decade before, which or 5 minutes before, right? Like, it was like, well, I believe the right thing now. And it was like, that idea itself was so toxic. And I have to say, I think it's ingrained in evangelicalism to some degree. This I am saved and others are not. There is a sort of dialectic set up there that I think can be really troubling, no matter what the content is one puts within it.
I will say that was because I wasn't, sorry, Dougie, I know this is your show.
Yours. It's yours.
That I was not raised in the evangelical. So it's interesting to see that all these pastors were raised that way, and that they still believe, that Jesus is the one and only way. And so that is the core, right? And like you're saying, having that, I don't know, it's just fascinating that is their upbringing, like this purity culture, this almost fundamentalism is how a lot of them were raised in, and it still kind of seeps through in this different church setting. Like, all of these things are escapable. Racism, misogyny, hierarchy, it's still there. It's still in this church too. That was what was fascinating to me.
Totally. And it was this idea, I think the most problematic part of this was like, well, like, we've transcended all that, right? We're building the kingdom of heaven on earth. So we're already transracial, trans everything. So we don't need to look at ourselves in the world because we're not of the world. We did that.
Right.
And it's like, no, none of us get a pass there,
And it's interesting, Eliza, because that is also something you hear a lot in mainline churches. Like, you're selecting this peculiar expression, self-identified peculiar expression of Christianity. And the issues that face them were also the issues facing so many other churches. I've been around many Episcopal Episcopalians in my life that are like, oh, you guys are adorable working on gay inclusion in the evangelical church. We did that back parenthetically when your father, Eliza, was the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church and worked really hard to make sure that the highest level of echelons in the Episcopal Church at the bishop level would allow that to happen. So there's a sense across our churches where you go from sort of one side of the continuum of formality, nothing quite as substantial as the Episcopal Church in that sense, all the way over to this street level thing going on at the Circle of Hope and other places. And yet across the board, people are like, oh, we've got this figured out. Like, we're going to use the best of what we have to solve this problem, as opposed to we have to come up with something new to solve this problem. That feels like it's universal beyond just this Circle of Hope
Or we
community.
just don't know. We don't know. Like, it's not we have to come up there's nothing to come up with. Like, it's like, let's just I think, one thing that I really saw in the course of this, you bring up this thing about, like the gayness in the Episcopal Church, and that's absolutely right. Like, we're basically this is watching the culture wars come for Christianity, right? Like, that's what it is. And I had an early seat to that because when my dad was the presiding bishop, he consecrated the first openly gay bishop, Gene Robinson, in the Episcopal Church, and that was really hard, and cost him a lot in many ways. And I would see him crying at the dining room table. People were enraged at that, and I was reporting on Franklin Graham at that same time, right? So, and Franklin Graham said to me, well, this will never happen to evangelicals because you guys that's debauched over there, right? That's already a mess. There's no Jesus in that church, so it's getting wiped off the face of the planet. Where I could see that all the forces of culture coming for mainstream Protestants were coming for evangelicals as well. And really the only posture to have when the world catches up with you is humility. Like, there's no solving it. You know what I mean? Like, and that's where I feel like that got Circle of Hope into trouble because so many people were used to feeling exceptional and that their theology was superior and they were doing things the right way. And to have it mirrored up to them that maybe this wasn't the right way, people's response to that question was really what determined their ability to survive within the church or not. Like, if people were like, yeah, I think I screwed up. Like, let's talk about that, right? And like, what did I do wrong? Or like, what is this? I don't really get it. That was okay. That posture of humility. But the opposite, to double down and be like, that's wrong. And, that forget it. That defensiveness was actually almost more of a problem than some of what had taken place in the past.
I have to go get my baby.
You got any closing
He
thoughts
just woke
before
up. I'll bring him into the screen.
Okay.
Yes.
And at Circle of Hope, Eliza, that conflict you're describing was happening within the community. It wasn't just people feeling they were in conflict with external forces. What you chronicle in the book is how that played out within relationships that were super meaningful to people and was the thing that they believed was their essence. So it was not happening outside the world, it was happening inside. Is that a fair way to say it?
That's a great way to say it. And inside it, in a community, and Shane could speak to this, so many people had left behind had made a painful journey already to find themselves like with a chosen family at Circle of Hope. They'd left behind childhood theology and churches and Republican politics and things that they didn't believe in anymore but that came with a cost. And they had chosen this new family, and part of what defined this family was a mutuality and a belief. We believe the right things. We found the right way. And I think to have that called into question was excruciating in a way that I can't fully account for. Does that make sense, Shane?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's exactly. I mean, part of this is so hard because you're holding a mirror up, and just because you don't like everything you see in the mirror doesn't mean that the mirror is not true.
Yeah, that's
And in some
so
ways, it's a mirror to the whole church. I mean, I'm friends with the current just left the presiding bishop role, Michael Curry and Stephanie Spellers, and they've been a part of Doug's friendship network too. And they're in a white world as African Americans, like they're coming against some of the same forces. I mean, as you're writing your book, the Methodist Church is splitting. So these same principalities and powers are at work. I think that what's so difficult about it is there is this sort of Anabaptist spirit that is like, we are going to be able to make it through because the culture, Jesus is more powerful. And, in a lot of these churches that didn't make it, there's mission drift. They became more concerned about social issues. They lost their grounding on Jesus. But the thing about Circle is it was still grounded in Jesus. And it's all these other things that are still very real, that are splitting people, breaking hearts, creating cracks in the constructs that, so yeah, you do such a great job. I mean, my question, Doug, for Eliza is, it's always been ironic that it's called Circle of Hope, which is such a big aspirational goal. And when you told me, you thought this might be the title of the book, I remember going, that's awesome and weird all at the same time. But I mean, do you walk away with hope that you didn't know you would find? Do you walk away really despairing over the loss of Circle of Hope? What do you, I mean, you're not supposed to get all your personal things in there, I guess, but I kind of wonder, because you were worshiping there. I mean, there was a part of you that's investigating this, but I think you're finding your way as you're writing it, and it
yeah,
doesn't
I
end.
wasn't really worshiping there, that ended up being like I joined a cell and they are incredibly powerful. And I became friends with one of the cell members, who is in the book. But I did leave the cell because I was like, this is too weird. Like I can't. I'm a reporter, and even though I'm not reporting inside this cell, it's really difficult not even to follow up on the strands of what I'm hearing where I know. So I ended up not doing that pretty consciously because of the complication of the ethics involved.
Mm.
I mean, it was sad to see this. I really did think, as you know, I really did think that this was going to be funny. I mean, a funny like
Yeah.
of a lovable, edgy weirdos doing their best in high stink to follow Jesus, but that it would be inspiring in its kind of smallness. And what happened is it became a much larger and maybe more like existential or important project about how do you believe different things than people within your community? What is the standard of community? Is it believing the same thing? That's kind of thin theologically, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
like, Odin, let us eat Oi, Nuggly. Hi,
Public hearing.
hi. This is, oh my goodness. Hi, Snuggler.
Hey, Eliza, one of the things I found so fascinating about the book is how you bookended with your own story a bit at the beginning and then at the end in the benediction. And you tell the story about your own father's dying in spring of 2023.
Mhm.
And it seems as if you started with a book about how do these people live? And you ended up writing a book about how does a community like this die or end?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
your father's role in your life was how should you then live for so long? And then at the same time, this book is coming to its completion, you have to reckon with how does one die?
Mm.
Does that ring true to you? And what do you think about the different questions that communities could be asking about the importance of how we live, or an individual too, and then the ultimate end of that very question?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me want to cry, honestly, which is I'm not usually get into too emotional a space when I'm, working. But yeah, I think, you know, what does it mean? I mean, like on the one hand, it's like, what does it mean that this institution is dying, right? What does it mean that not just Circle of Hope, but the church is dying, whatever that is, whatever that expression was, like that, like, and you know, I really sometimes, like, I took a class in college about individuation and the theory of evolution, like human individuation, and one of the early stages is like the emanational bond, like,
Mm.
and I feel like one thing that since my dad died, like the unquestioning, and I would sometimes, to be honest, I would hear this in Ben. I would hear this in one of the pastors whose dad started the church, and it that he was not as critical of his dad as he might be. And
Mm.
I didn't hear that with judgment. I heard that with identification, because I'm not, even if I were critical of my dad 5 years ago, losing him has made him more of sort of an object of reverence for
Mm.
this period of time. And I was going to write a book next about him and about our family, really, and his family, which is so dark. And there's so much family history that
Mm.
my dad grew out of, and I'm not quite ready to write it. I'm not
Mm.
going to write it yet. And part of the reason I was going to write it is because Rachel, one of the pastors, she really, when she got to the end of her, I don't even know if she's read the whole book, but her material in the book, she said, it's, you've taken snippets of my life, and where is yours, right? And it was such
Mm.
an interesting question, because for me, the ethics of what I do are involved in withholding. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not on the
Mhm.
page because the ethical standard is to reflect your life. But she
Mm.
was sharing with me a different kind of ethical standard, which is
Mm.
vulnerability, right? So that's one reason why my dad is in the end of the book, in a response to that, to try to come
Mm.
forward to her questioning as we got to the end of the book. I mean, look, we all, obviously we're all dying, right? But like,
Mm.
are we willing to own up to, in the moment that we're in, our limitations? And I can't do that. Oh, listen and listen. I can't do that without humor and grace. I can't.
Mm.
Like, if I screw up all the time, I scream at my kid, I do X and Y, I'm very, shouting at people about the pancakes upstairs, whatever I'm doing, right? My
Right.
best shot is to own my humanness in that moment, because I am dying, right?
Mm.
I don't know if that answers it.
Mm.
I think there's a call in this book to be, as humans, as fully realized as we can be, because there is nothing else. There's nothing else to do. It doesn't mean there's no God or anything like that, or no institutions last, but there's no future of an institution that isn't based on an evolving present, where we show up in the fullness of who we are, and that's the future.
Yeah. Because truthfully, life isn't bookended by death. Life incorporates death all the time. It's woven into it. And oftentimes, religious communities, but all other organizations as well, only talk about perpetual life and perpetual growth and perpetual continuation. And we don't recognize the times where many a thing has ended and died, and we don't get good at it. And it's very odd that we get to the end of something, and it's a shock to our system. And it feels to me like this book is a hint at ways we could start to understand that embedded nature of life and death and rebirth and renewal, as opposed to just, can we keep this thing going for another generation? It's, I don't know, it's just a different project that a lot of organizations, our democracy is facing it, our churches are facing it, our family structures are facing it. It
That's
seems
so
pretty.
exact. I mean, I think that's exactly right. I mean, very few of my friends are involved in churches, and yet they read my books out of duty. And like, so many of them have been like, I didn't want to read this. Like, I don't want to read about a church, but this is exactly what happened in my progressive organization over the past few years, right?
Mm.
Like, so how do we, and lots of the pastors and people in Circle of Hope are hospice chaplains, right? Like,
Mm.
that's happening. Like, they are helping people die well. And I don't know what greater humility there is in than in accepting
Mm.
death, right? And I don't know how to be even talking about this without noting the adorable Nuggle who's Right, living. Look at this little bird
Right.
that
Be so
lives.
New life
just a pod,
that's right on the screen.
but,
I'm really trying not to devolve into cooing sounds because that's much more authentic. Hello, hello.
Well, and the two go together. We've been reflecting so much on how life ends up looking a lot like a beginning of life. There's this little baby look, and then at the end of life, there's these parallels to it, being cared for and held and nurtured and all the same things. And then there's this period of time. I don't know. There's just something about the newness and the ending that feel, like they're kind of integrated.
I think that's totally true, and I'll tell you what I can tell after after writing this book. My theology needs to evolve. Like I've tried to do this before. Like I've been like gone up to like Harvard Divinity School to read the like Vedic texts with a scholar for a year and be like, oh, I've got to and oh, sneezing. But I've got to there's a language there are like principles here, there are ancient principles that need to be brought forward. And one of my awesome teachers says, when you read a book, you're not reading a reporting, you're reading a report on the writer's state of consciousness, right? And so I feel like there's a lot of compassion in this book intentionally. um,
Mhm.
but there's a those questions that you're asking, Doug, and the profundity of them, I think there are better answers that are available to us. And I think that it's part of my job to kind of reach back and look more deeply at some of those questions.
I
Well,
will say your book made me do a oh, sorry, Dougie.
I was just going to say, I know, Eliza, I know you need to go. So Katie and Shane, whatever you've got. And then Katie and Shane, can you stay on and we chat for a bit after Eliza goes?
I was just gonna say your book did make I might have said this earlier. What I've thought about the most is my own self and how I'm living. Am I living true to Jesus? Am I living true to, anti-racism? Am I living into this um place that I would like to be at? Or like I'm expecting these pastors to be as I'm reading it. I'm like, wait, why aren't you there yet? And then I'm like, wait, am I there yet?
Yeah.
Mm,
So it is that it does that to that's what I've been thinking about mostly since I've read it is my own reflections with it.
Yeah, and I can keep on. I'm going to hear a screen door bang as my sister comes back from the freezing lake, and so that will be I'll get off then, but I can stay on till then. And I
a very
think, I mean,
moment of you there with the screen door slams and then you got to go.
but that's the question for me too, Katie, and reporting it always was, like, and I would say this, like, well, my own whiteness and privilege, of which I'm
Mm,
a pretty extreme example, like of like generations of elite schools and all, and hopefully, like, how do I use that stuff, like,
mm,
you know, in the service of a greater good, which is part of like how I was raised to see it. But at the same time, like, this evolution of the world is going to cost me big. I have
mm,
had enough. And am I ready to pay what it's going to cost?
right.
You
Mhm.
know, and that I don't know what that is yet. I really
Mhm.
don't, you know. But I can tell when I'm not being authentic about it. I mean, that's not true. I don't really feel inauthentic about it. I feel scared. I feel scared of what is it going to cost me. Um,
Mhm.
but that's the same question of what life is going to cost us.
Yeah.
That's what life experience comes with cost. And it's like I learned that pretty early on as a war correspondent. Like I would be like, there's nothing I can't see. We could even talk about Gaza a little bit. Like the next book I'm writing is
Mhm.
about
Mm,
children amputees in Gaza, of which there are larger numbers than ever in history.
Mm.
That reporting is crushing me. And
Mm.
I'm not sure I can handle the degree of secondary trauma required to tell those stories. Um,
Mm.
I don't know. Can I do that? So that, I mean, that
Mm.
is yeah, that there are, these are like, I don't know, just back at you, Katie, that I feel exactly the same thing. Like, am I living this as authentically as I should be?
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What was it about being a war correspondent that gave you a pathway to do something like what you did in Circle of Hope, embedding yourself in a community to tell its broader story? On a quick glance, somebody might think, well, that's a diversion from your, other Pulitzer Prize winning level work. But it seems you've carried some capacity to be able to see things and tell a story and find yourself in it, in war conflict, something happening in Philadelphia inside of a religious community, and now back into what's happening with the effects of war in Gaza. How do you think about that for yourself? How did you get here?
I don't really know. I mean, it kind of takes us back to theology. I really respond to like theories of liminality and like the idea that meaning lies at the edges of places. It's just always been where I thrive. And whether that's the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or it's a bunch of nuts on the corner in Kensington trying to melt guns into garden tools, like whatever expression of liminality that is, I feel called, maybe not so much to even, to live it by proxy, but to write about people. I think that's where meaning lies. I think that in America, we know this. Like, we have lost our reverence for the edge, right? Like, if you look at coming of age rituals, you look at any spiritual ceremonies, like they involve the wilderness, they involve the edge of going out there. And we are so keen on relevance, relevance, relevance. What does it look at the heart of things? Where is power? That we miss where the world is changing and where things are really evolving. And that's the edge. And for me, that doesn't really matter what edge it is. I can kind of feel it when I'm on it, if that makes sense.
Do you remember when that first struck you, that you were someone who wanted to live in those liminal spaces, that edgy time? Was that a childhood thing as well? Like, is that sort of always been there and you've curated it, or?
No, probably college. I mean, when I went to Princeton, where I'm just coming back, and Princeton, when I was there, was not about the edge of things. It was very much about like power, career, like being, and I was writing poetry, so that took me to the edge of things. And I could tell that for all my desire and ambition to be relevant or to feel safe in the middle of things, that was not going to work out for me. I got married, shortly after, now, because now I'm sharing the personal because I feel like I have to, it's the right thing to do. But I got married shortly after graduating from college and lived on the Upper East Side and had to leave that life behind because there was no edge there that was safe. And where I did find edges, it was harmful to other people. And so I kind of deliberately, by the age of 26, took that into my work.
Fascinating.
On a random side note, on this last trip to the West Bank, Eliza, I might have told you this, but I went to a little micro business inside of the refugee camp that was taking mortars from the tear gas canisters and bombs and melting them down into art. So I brought a bunch of it back with me. And next time you're over there, you got to visit that little crew. They're amazing.
That's amazing.
So,
That's amazing. Melting things. I think that's the title of your next book. Melting.
Melting things.
From hearts to hardware.
Yeah. Melted. The Shane Claiborne journey.
All right, dudes. I am going to leap off.
Yep.
It's so good to see you.
We love you.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your life,
so
being so good and kind to so many people.
Thank
If
you.
want more of Eliza, you can find her on our podcast coming up before long.
You guys rock, and without you, there would be no book. Truly. Thank you so much for being such tender guides into all this nuttiness.
Well, we love you. We'll see you soon.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye, friend. I mean, come on. Eliza Grizwold is a unique voice and character and all this stuff, don't you think? Just
so
she's amazing.
Yeah.
Do you
Katie, when
regret inviting me on your podcast now?
I am thrilled, and we're still going, so I don't think,
Oh.
Yeah,
you
you see that
I
on
didn't.
the air at the bottom there, baby?
I'm obviously not on many a podcast, Dougie.
yeah, don't you worry about it. Don't you worry about that, Katie. We're just gonna keep going. Katie, I'm interested in your take. You were part of Circle of Hope community. It's Eliza made it pretty clear that people like you helped her even find this as interesting. When you put this book in your hand and started reading it, do you remember what was first in your mind? Like I don't know, what you anticipated or your apprehensions or anything about what you were thinking before you started reading it?
Okay, I'll tell you my first two. One is that this is gonna sound so silly, but if Shane is mentioned, I hope he comes out on top. Because you never know. You never know, like, how people are mentioned or construed in books.
So you're saying you pick it up and you're thinking, if my husband is in this, because
Yeah.
very well should be, could be, I hope he does okay. So you're reading with a little bit of anticipation,
Yeah.
hope, and expectation. Wow, great.
Yeah. So that was one thing. The other thing was, I guess, I hope, which I didn't doubt, but that the honesty of what was happening comes out. Like, all of it, and it's clear. Which I think it was. I think it was done really well. It's hard because I know these people, but also when I read the book, I was like, "Oh, I don't know these people."
Oh,
I mean, that was a lot of it.
interesting.
Mhm.
You had said that you were asking yourself a whole lot of questions about your own development and where you were now and how you're thinking about these same issues that are prevalent in the Circle of Hope community and are then played out in the book. Do you feel well equipped now to navigate those questions of whatever this was bringing up to you, or do you feel like you're in a situation where you're having to sort of open source, how am I going to be? Like, do you know what I'm getting at?
I mean, I think the tricky thing, right, is that one, I hate confrontation and I'm very quiet, and I also don't put myself in these kinds of institutions, like churches or places where I have to deal on that level with these things. Like, even sometimes when Shane's talking about, "Oh man, this is going on,"
Mm-hmm.
just in, like, with some friends, that if it gets known, it's a big deal. Like, I'm not in those situations intentionally. So, I think more for me, it was just like, as I'm reading the book, I'm questioning, I hope that I am not projecting things unintentionally. Like, aware am I aware of my whiteness? I guess is kind of what I kept thinking about.
Yeah.
Because I clearly am very white in a very non-white neighborhood. So and I know that, but am I being aware of it in a way that is nurturing, or is it hindering? I guess that's what I think about all the time.
Yeah. And to be clear, you are living in the very neighborhood where this community was functioning. Like, you're right outside your
This is
door.
interesting.
Right?
This is very interesting. It was hard to host a cell, because there is a kind of a line that a lot of people do not like to cross, and we live on that other side of that line.
Hmm.
So it is hard to. It can be tricky. It was a little tricky to get people to come to
You mean the
our cell.
physical location where you are is in a part
Yes,
of Philadelphia that, even with this community that was doing the things Eliza talked about, like people wanting to cross boundaries and do work, it was like,
right.
yeah, maybe we don't go over to Katie's cell because that doesn't feel quite
For
right.
some
Because
people, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
which is fine, and that's not even just white people, that's just people in general. Like, when
And
a neighborhood is painted as scary, I mean,
yeah,
that's what you internalize. If that's what the media says, then are you gonna drive there alone in the dark?
yeah.
I is that I mean, that's just frightening for anyone
Yeah. When
if you
you were
don't know.
involved with Circle of Hope and all this stuff was going on, it was in a stage of life that didn't involve you being called mom by people and you having the
Right.
self narrative of a little human being that's in your care and you have a unique connection to.
When I didn't know Shane.
Okay, I
We did
didn't
not
know.
know each other.
Oh,
See, I
okay.
was in the South Philly I was in South Philly Circle. I was in
Okay.
a different congregation.
I see.
Mhm.
I see.
So we didn't know each other. Mhm.
So there's one story which is told in the book in a way, which is the development of Circle of Hope from some point of its existence till its ending. Then there's the story of Katie, who's reading this story and then mapping your own experience over the top of it. Uh, you've been many a person then in this in this process and have had to make a and have made a lot of choices that have put you in different places,
Mhm.
relationships.
Sure. Well, and I've known all these pastors in this story since I mean, she talks about Johnny working in the thrift store. I knew him when he worked in that thrift store. I lived right around the corner, and
Yeah.
he would come to our house all the time, and he ended up marrying one of my roommates, who he's no longer married to. So,
Okay.
yeah, you know all these different side stories of people. So, yeah, and like I said before, I went to Circle because of the cells. I
Sure.
thought it was so cool to have a Bible study in your house.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did not grow up with that. I didn't grow up with that.
Did you
So,
grow up in religion at all? I seem to remember you having not much of a religious life growing up. Is that right?
I
Is that
mean,
a
we went to church on like Easter and Christmas, and we prayed at our meals. And my dad was an avid hunter, and that's how he introduced me to God. Really, he was like, this is where God is," kind of stuff. But we weren't like when I met Shane, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is what people do with church." Like you have like whole conferences that you go to? This is insane. People
can
pay to do this? Yeah.
can I ask you can I dig down on that a little bit because I find this so refreshing and interesting. Um, w- when you just said at the start of this part of our conversation, having a Bible study in your house felt fresh or intriguing, a bit outside the norm and the rules. Is that because you had a sense that Bible things were the possession of organized life and religion, and you were able to free form it in a way in community, and that in felt fresh and revelatory?
Yeah, I think I just you the only time I'd really experienced the Bible was if you went to church.
Mhm,
And so
mhm.
the fact that people can come to my own home and I get to make snacks for them and we can disagree and laugh and have fun, that I miss that today. I miss that now. I'm still trying to figure out how to start it. I'm like, do I start a book club? Like I want people,
Yep.
it was totally blew my mind.
No, I hear you. I grew up in a family where we didn't make things from scratch, especially, like, desserts. Like, we'd have I don't know, we'd buy stuff at
Oh,
the store, and then I
yeah.
would meet people who could make it at home, and I'm like, I'm talking about, like, high
Right,
school and
it's a
college
similar
years.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm like,
yeah,
"Are you have you have the things to how much
yeah.
to put it like that was just wild to me, right? That something could
Mhm,
be kind of inside the familial system, not inside the production system. And,
mhm.
and for a lot of people, their experience with religion has been the production side. And then they find out that there's, I don't know, like you can just do it. And there's first names, the Bible's full of a bunch of first names of people doing stuff. And that kind of an approach
Yeah.
has an excitement to it. And then at some
Well,
point,
that you
people,
can just freely talk. I think that was because you can't freely talk in church. So it was like, wait, I can. Okay. So I remember this one conversation where I was like, one of my family members is thinking of not, they're questioning should they let their child go to this Bible study because the guy leading the Bible study is gay. And I remember bringing that to my cell group, like, why would someone think that? Why would you think because someone is gay, they can't teach your child about the Bible? I remember not understanding the connection.
I still don't
And
understand the connection. Maybe you figured out the
yeah, no,
connection.
me
You
neither. But it was like, and so they're trying to be like, well, because this is a very Southern Baptist church. So they're trying to explain to me this, I didn't know there were other denominations. I didn't understand any of that. So it was like this awakening of like, and then it's like, wait, there's a whole denomination that doesn't let women preach. It was like, it was like my whole idea of church just blew up in these cells because you can have these honest conversations, and there's only like 6 of you.
it's one of the things that for people who are kind of post evangelical or grew up in evangelical circles and stuff, and now have transitioned beyond that in their thinking and their expressions and all this, that a lot of those folks, which I know very well, and I'm part of that community myself, recognize the loss that there is of that kind of honesty and openness and questioning.
Mm.
Because the more you move into other spaces of implication in your life, like frankly, when you move into social issues and social cultural issues and religious political issues, the stuff we talk about as adults, there's a whole lot of rules that feel more like the way church was. Like there's only a certain set
Mhm.
of things you can say. There's a set of
Yes,
presumptions that if you don't begin with those, you're not going to be well received. Like you don't,
right.
there is a lockdown that comes from religion, especially evangelical religion for sure. But there was also, for a lot of us, these spaces that were carved out where it's like, it's okay. Like no one's going to blame you for the thoughts in your head. We'll work with
Right,
you. Well, we'll
right.
offer you other things. And, that,
It's
and
so
for a
freeing.
lot of us, we're just trapped because, man, the
Mhm.
nerves that exist if you ever say stuff out loud, and I'm not
Yeah,
just picking on like overly wokeness. I'm actually talking about something more profound than that, which is there's not a lot of places for someone to say, I want to tell you what I believe, and I'm
yeah,
not sure I'm happy that I believe this, right?
yeah.
Like the difference
Totally.
between the amen and the uh-oh of your belief, right?
Yeah.
I read this book called Foreskin's Lament, which was about
Hmm.
a fundamentalist Jewish person growing up in a fundamentalist Jewish situation. And he has this nice long beginning to his book, and he ends with the line, I believe in God. It's been a real problem for me. Right. He's kind of
Interesting.
recognizing the belief he holds is a thing
Yeah,
he's not always happy about. And
yeah,
that space, I feel like that's what Eliza was getting at in the book. That's what she's trying to articulate. I feel
yeah,
like you're seeing some of that. I long for that. I used to be part of a community that had that. I
yeah.
don't. Now I just live in a world where it's like, just try to keep this thing between the lines and not say the
Mhm.
wrong thing in the wrong place to the wrong
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
Uh, so that feels weird to me that there was an edgy freedom to borrow Eliza's concept. There was a liminality. Let's get up to the edge and then live
Mhm.
there for a while and recognize that we're going to be good to each other anyway. And I feel like that doesn't exist so much anymore
Right. Can we get that back?
for me. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah.
Do you have that? Where do you do that now? Where do you like say the things you're believing and then wondering if you're happy with those beliefs, or the things you doubt about stuff you know and don't know and all that? Where do you do that?
A lot of it is with Shane, mostly because some of it just blow that the world that he exists in is I don't understand it, and
Hmm.
it doesn't make sense to me.
Right
So I
on.
do ask him a lot of questions about that. The the Christian evangelical world is a strange place. I tell Shane all the time, I'm so glad I was not raised in it because I don't have that baggage. Thank you, because this it's intense.
Yeah.
And I
Right?
think
It's
a
not
lot with
just life
Shane.
and death, it's eternal life and death that's on the line. They've found a way
Shoosh.
to ratchet it up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy. And a lot with my sister. She is she's always had difficulty being in a Southern Baptist church. What book is that she loved? John Wayne, Jesus and John Wayne.
Yeah, Kristen, he knows Kristen.
She loved that book, and she goes to the same church that Franklin Graham goes to, so she wrestles with that. And so we wrestle with a lot of that, because she obviously was raised the same way I was. So she's like, what is this madness? And it is.
But she finds something there that connects and meets her in a way that she's going to keep that alive as well.
I mean, here's the reality, right? Here's the reality with Circle. A lot of times we stay in place because we love the people, regardless of how crazy we are.
Yes.
Crazy is not the right word. How out of line our beliefs may be. You stay because you found something that you share together and you love together. And she does not believe in the theology of the Southern Baptist Church, but she's been with those people for 20 something years.
Yeah. There are people.
Which is the same with Circle. It's heartbreaking because these are people you've been with for 20 something years and you love them, but in the book they just can't seem to go on together.
Yeah.
And I think that's the hardest part about the book is the church all of a sudden becomes a vetting mechanism. And I think that is when you lose sight of what the church actually is, which it
Mm.
is at the end of the day an institution. And I know that sounds cold, but if you're looking at it in that way, you
Yeah.
have to let everyone in.
Yeah. It's not just a set of relationships that we call friendships that are being formed and shaped in their own natural flow. There's a force of energy that's organized that people are also saying yes to,
Right.
and those things become tied together. Some of us, who've chosen to marry, like I got married to Shelley, my wife, in 1988, so 36 years ago. And part of it is just her and I. Like, I really love her, want to be with her. She's the most interesting person I would ever imagine spending my life with.
Hmm.
There's also an institution of marriage. Like, there's an agreement that we have that fits inside of a larger construct of our family and government and ownership of things. Like, there's an institutional narrative, and you're just kind of, you're kind of working those sort of all the time, uh,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of relationships that are that way. And sometimes the institutional side becomes more forceful. And frankly, if we decide to end our marriage, the
Hmm.
institutional side is more resistant to us ending it than the relational
Right.
side.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Which is
That's
true for yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go on.
No, that's what happens here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've had this long sense that almost every community, religious or not, but especially religious communities, are super open to people asking questions. Like, I've never met a place or a leader or a system that has said, we don't want people asking questions. The problem is not in question asking. The
Mhm.
problem is when a person doesn't accept the answer to the question that they've offered.
Yeah.
So if you can ask a question and then
Right.
someone in authority says, oh, here's the answer, and you say, okay, that's great. They're like, this is so healthy and good.
Yeah.
When you ask a question and they give an answer, and then you say, you sure about that? I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure I would. That's where the problem lies, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
tend to say, oh, I was in a system that didn't let me ask questions. I
Right.
think more of our experiences are, I was in a system where I wasn't allowed to have an answer different than the approved ones.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
I don't know, it feels like that's a different project in some ways. Like, how do we solve for that kind of overall?
Well, on a similar vein, this something similar that happens into our neighborhood all the time. I tell Shane this is the worst thing an organization can come into our neighborhood and do, which is include all of us and say they want our voice heard and then do what they want to. So you come in and give all your opinions, and you go to all these meetings and you say, "Oh, we want the mural to stay," and then you come out next week and the mural's painted over. Like those are the things, like, just tell me up front. Just say, "You can ask a question, but this is the answer that you're gonna get."
Yeah.
Or, "Sure, we're gonna include you, but we're not gonna listen to you." Like, just say it up front.
Yeah.
That's all you want. I think it's more the don't
That's
act like I'm important, or don't make me feel like you care.
yes.
If at the end of the day you're gonna have your own answer, or you're gonna do what you wanna do.
Yep. Yep.
Which we're
And
all guilty of that. It's not like I'm not above that.
that's right. That's right. And that's hard. Anybody, schools are a very typical place for this kind of thing. You do want to hear the voices, but then at some point, every
You have to.
opinion doesn't
Yeah.
carry the same amount of insight or influence or respect. So then you have to make other decisions. And this is where it gets really squishy
Mhm.
with being a human being living with other human beings, right? I mean, in some ways, this just the human project.
Right. Yeah.
And
It's
we
like
do want
Eliza was saying, the grace and humility. I mean, I I don't know the Bible that well. I wish that I knew it better, and I'm not theological, but I often have to remind myself of the verse that is the what is it, Shane? The plank and the splinter? The what is it? You know it, Dougie.
I do.
The law. Yeah. I
Yeah.
have to think about that often,
Yeah.
because when you sit down at the end of the day,
That's right.
did it do you any good to
Uh,
stew about somebody else while you and, like, critique somebody else
yeah.
when you actually aren't going to bed happy? So
Yes.
you might as well spend the time figuring out what you got going on in
Yeah.
your own self.
Like there's an interesting thing where I think appropriately, and I've come around on this thought much differently than I was 20 years ago or 10 years ago, maybe, that it's really important to mind your own business
Yeah,
and to take account for who's in your business. Right. So like right now, you've got a little sweetie over your right shoulder. That's now part of your business.
right.
Right. And like when you're minding your business, it includes a new human being.
Yeah,
And sometimes we end up being greedy and taking on things that are not our business and not tending to the things and people that are. That's that log in your own eye while trying to pick the speck out of another's is, hey, like you got a thing to be up to
mhm,
here.
yeah,
And it feels to me like a lot of life is like walking on. I walked a thing in Arizona called the Devil's Tower, Devil's
mm,
Bridge. It's like a natural rock formation, just a little bridge. It's about 30 feet off the ground, and like it's just a natural bridge with nothing on the side, right? So you climb up a rock thing and you walk across. I don't
that's
know, maybe
scary.
30 yards. It's terrifying. It's
Yeah,
terrifying. And you have this, if you're nervous about heights like I am, I have this nervousness that I don't care if I fall to my right or my left. I just don't want to fall off this thing.
right,
That sometimes life sort of feels like that, right? And we just argue about would it be better to fall right or left? And like, I don't think I want to fall. I don't want to fall at all.
right,
Like finding our equilibrium. There's just a lot of metaphors that could be better for us than am I right or am I wrong or am I
yeah,
minding my own business? What do I care about? Do I care about the business of others or myself? Like, I don't know. There's just some ways to think about all this that
yeah,
almost no one I know has figured it out. And when they do feel comfortable that they figured it out, it really works great for them and then doesn't
mhm.
work great for me. It's like a custom designed shirt that looks great on them and doesn't quite
Well,
fit.
that's how it is since you were born. You read all these baby books, and at the end of every chapter, it's like, "Oh, but every baby's different." So it's like, follow this formula, but not every baby's the same. It's just how we are since the day we come out. It's like, yeah, this formula might have worked for this church or this person or even your mom or dad, but it's not gonna work for you.
In the same way.
Like,
That's it. Wow.
same with Eli. It's like, do this schedule, do that, don't do that, and he's his own little person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And really, I mean, the thing about babies is they just don't tend to pull their own weight. Like when you really think about it, you're kind of like, wow, we're really setting up a thing here.
I don't know, Dougie. He pulls
Little,
his weight with laughs and smiles. I feel like that
he,
takes me to the top there.
he's compensating with charm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used to have a theology test that was this: if it's not true for a 6-month-old baby, then it's not true for us. So pick your thing, pick your
Yeah,
demand. What theologically are you going to say that a person has to do? And if a baby can't do it,
I like that.
then it's just an adult version of
Yeah,
something. But
yeah.
most people are babies for a while, and a lot of the planet is made up of babies. So when you talk about human beings and how we are, babies are pretty important piece to all of this. And so I'd be around religious people who would put some demand that only an adult could do in order to be right with God in any shape or form. It's like, okay, but that formula leaves out the babies. So
Right.
if
You
you're
gotta
good with
include the
that,
baby.
if you're good with that, and if you got a sliding scale of, I don't know, the divine, that's like, how old are you? If that's how, okay, all right, then, then I don't know. It's just kind of a reality that our experience lands on all of us. Well,
This
Katie,
is lovely, Dougie. I have
sure.
to go, but
No,
I don't know how you got me on this thing. You've convinced me somehow.
well, I feel that was one of the more easy convincing things that I'll have to do today to someone, and I'm glad you were so ready to say yes. And thank you for being a part of it. It was so great. If Shane and Eli are still within ear distance, tell them thank you, and we'll see you down the road.
Yeah, hopefully we get to see you soon.
All right. Well, I think this metaphor of the name of this book by Eliza Griswold and the name of that community that you were a part of is really great. May
Yeah.
you stay in the circle of hope. And that's a pretty
Yes.
good, I don't know who
That is
coined that,
beautiful.
but that circle of hope's pretty good.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Sorry you
Good.
didn't get to say bye to Shane.
Yeah. I'll say bye to him
He's
later.
somewhere out there. Yeah. Okay. Love
Good to
you.
see you. Love you. Bye.
Bye, Dougie.
I think that's it. You still there, Dan?
I am, and I think that's great.
Good enough?
Yep.
We're done. Just a blue screen.
Just a blue screen of goodbye.
It's gone to blue screen. All right. Hey, thanks, y'all, for being a part of this. Next week, we're going to be at the Democratic National Convention trying to put out some content from there. So hopefully we'll see you from there. All right. Bye.